Okay, so you left home for the first time on your way to UCLA,
Right.
driving across country.
Right.
What do you remember about the cross-country drive? And then what were your first
It was
few weeks?
uneventful. I was with Richard serving. We took the old Route 66, which doesn't even exist anymore since it was February, I think. One wanted the southern route rather than the northern route. The trip was uneventful. I arrived at LA, dropped Richard off with his uncle Ilya. Maybe I even stayed there the first night, but the next day I went to UCLA. First time at UCLA. And that was a revelation coming from the University of Chicago, for example. I always wore a jacket, a corduroy sports jacket, and a tie to class. Everyone did. At UCLA, it was strictly T-shirts and faded jeans. So very different culturally.
Did you accommodate that? Did you buy yourself some faded jeans and t-shirts?
Well, I never wore a tie to the lab once I got to UCLA, let's put it like that.
Okay.
The next day or the next few days, I established, the classes I needed to take, and I met Saul Winstein, who was the reason I went to UCLA in the first place. Seemed like a nice guy. He asked me what I was interested in. I told him free radical chemistry, and he said, I have some projects in that area that I think you might be interested in. And he told me a little about them, and that's how I got my thesis program. It was free radical rearrangements and ring closures. Shortly thereafter, I moved into my lab, room 4380 of the chemistry building, and there were three lab partners, Marty Shatavsky, Charlie Wilcox, Dick Heck, and me. Ironically, Dick Heck, probably 30 years later, won a Nobel Prize in chemistry, not for anything he had done at UCLA, but since. Marty Shatavsky passed on after unfortunate circumstances, which I won't go into, and Charlie Wilcox took a position, I think, at Cornell University. So everyone did okay, a nice bunch of guys. Marty was the only married guy, so Heck, I, and Charlie, and some other single guys, became comrades, and we go out for lunch together or out for dinner together. So everyone's in the same boat. They're all away from home, so they're all eager to kind of connect and establish, roots, at least at UCLA.
So what did you guys do for fun? You said went out for dinner, went out for lunch. There must have been more than that.
I think for fun, largely, and it had an important impact on my life. Fun, we didn't have that much money. Arnold Feinberg was a camping and sightseeing enthusiast. So on long weekends or vacations, we'd go to national parks. So we spent time at Yosemite and Death Valley and Lassen and Valley of Fire State Park, and I acquired a sleeping bag, so that was a new experience. I'd never had a sleeping bag at home or slept outside. And I remember one Thanksgiving we actually spent in Death Valley, and I think for dinner, we had, bread and cans of Dinty Moore beef stew. And in that environment at Death Valley at night, it was a perfect holiday. So you don't need the turkey and the cranberry sauce.
You just need good friends.
Just good friends and something to fill up your belly with.
So your time at UCLA was
1953 to 56.
53 to 56.
Yeah.
And then UCLA came to an end. You defended your thesis successfully.
Let me pursue it a little further. The particular problem I had was state of the art, challenging at the time, largely because those times were different. Today, I would be embarrassed to give my Ph.D. problem to a AP high school chemistry student.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was there, mass spectrometry hadn't been developed, gas chromatography hadn't been developed. So the techniques that one would use today to solve the problem on a long weekend, I had to struggle with largely because of the times.
So you were rubbing flints together.
Pretty much so.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you successfully
So
completed your studies.
and I think I was probably a better student than average because after you finished your coursework, the university offered cumulative exams. So these were offered every month, and if you were in organic chemistry, you took them in organic. If you were in physical, you took them in physical. And basically, these exams were offered on a Saturday morning and consisted of passing out a reprint of something in the current literature and then asking questions on it. And I think you had to pass 7 of these cumulative exams in order to really qualify for writing your thesis and all that. And I think I passed 7 out of 8. And that was pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you knew your stuff, your passion for chemistry transitioned to your studies.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, and then as I was writing my thesis and finishing up, the question says, well, what do you do now? And the choices, remember, this is a guy who's never met a chemist in his life other than chemistry teachers. The choices are, do you want to go academic or industrial? If you wanted to go academic, the route would have been to apply for a postdoctoral fellowship at some other school and then try to get an academic position.
Mm-hmm.
And by that time I was, 22 or 23 years old. I had been in academics all of my life, so I made the decision to go seek an industrial position. And schools made it easy. Major companies that were looking for people sent recruiters out to the university. So you would sign up for Dow Chemical representative or Monsanto or Chevron or Exxon or Merck or any of those. So I signed up, I think, with, 11 things, and I was interviewed. And I got invited to visit to 9 of the 11 people I saw invited me out to visit.
So as you were completing your studies at UCLA, you were looking for a job.
Yeah.
And you had 9 of 11 different choices
That's right.
that you could have made.
Yeah.
and the different companies were all over the country,
Yeah,
obviously,
that's right.
and you chose Chevron.
Yeah. Before we get into that, I should also point it out that when I was at UCLA, just to contrast it with today, UCLA's fees were $39 a semester, which included medical care, a locker in the gym, and I think tuition was waived. If you maintained a B average in graduate school, tuition was waived. So, I went to UCLA for $39 a semester.
Okay, now you're just showing off.
No, and I know, and I didn't even pay that because the way graduate schools operate, they need a lot of laboratory assistants, teaching assistants.
Mm-hmm.
So from day one at UCLA, I became a teaching assistant, and that paid $134 a week or something like that. And then I think in my last year, I was the Dow Chemical Company fellow.
So you were teaching a TA for undergraduates in chemistry.
Exactly.
And then you were also working on your PhD.
Yeah, and in the last year, having a Dow fellowship, I didn't have to do any teaching.
Okay.
So
So I've never asked you this question before, Dad, but there you are, an upperclassman wearing a corduroy jacket, perhaps, looking pretty good, as we've seen from some of these pictures. Weren't some of those undergraduate young ladies interested in you? Did you ever have any sort of engagements with them? What happened there?
no, I didn't. First of all, even among, I think at UCLA, they probably had at any one time 100 people working, 100 to 200 people working on their PhDs, and of those 200 co-classmates, I think there were only 2 women.
Okay.
And the schools, it was a kind of political thing. If you were to ask people in the department, how come there aren't more women there? The answer would be, well, we feel a responsibility after we give a PhD to get people settled in industry, and industry doesn't hire women, so there's no sense in us training them. And then, of course, when you go into industry and ask the question, how come there are no women here? They say, well, the schools aren't turning them out.
Yeah, so there were 2 women in your class of 100 PhD candidates.
Yeah.
But in the undergraduate program, there were probably more.
That was a kind of forbidden stuff.
Okay, so the upperclassmen didn't fraternize with the underclassmen.
Not just an upperclassman, but sort of modern sort of faculty. And it would have been inappropriate for me to take one of my pretty young students and
out on a date. Okay, I just thought I'd ask. That's not a question I've asked you before.
Yeah.
So you were at UCLA. You had interviews with these 9 different industrial companies. How did you make the decision to go with the company you went with?
Yeah. Okay. So. There were a variety of companies. There were chemical companies. There were a number of oil companies. There was one pharmaceutical company. I interviewed Exxon, Ohio, Texaco, Shell, Chevron, Merck, G.D. Searle in Chicago. And I think the chemical portion of the oil companies were the ones that was most interesting to me.
Was that because of the pay? What was it about
No,
those?
the pay was, in general, oil companies paid more than chemical companies. Chemical companies paid more than pharmaceutical companies. But, my first paycheck at Chevron that I ultimately decided on was $625 a month, which was a big salary in those days.
So but you had these different options for different companies in different parts of
Yeah.
the country. Why Chevron?
Okay, well, I think I had seen enough of California on some of these trips to like California, but Los Angeles was was different than it is today. They had no symphony orchestra, no museums. It was called Seven Suburbs in Search of a City. It wasn't it was a huge city, but it wasn't a big city. San Francisco was the banking, and that was the commercial capital of California at that time. So I narrowed it down to Chevron and Shell. Before I even mention that because that was a pivot point in my life. So I interviewed Shell, and they were really very big in free radical chemistry, and they loved me.
Can you blame them?
They interviewed me for 2 days, put me up at the St. Francis Hotel, wined me and dined me, told me that they've never had a candidate more suited for their interests than I am. So I was very impressed with Shell in Emeryville. I get interviewed by Chevron, and the guy who interviews me at Chevron isn't even a chemist. He's an engineer out of human relations, if you'll excuse the expression. I asked him stupid questions like, gee, what kind of chemistry are they doing at Chevron? Which isn't an unreasonable question to ask. He said, I haven't the faintest idea. I haven't been there in 15 years. Why don't you ask your boss? It turned out Saul Winstein consulted for Chevron.
Okay.
Anyway, the recruiter from Chevron who interviewed me didn't impress me, and I apparently didn't impress him. So I got a rejection letter from Chevron, and it was, the real sort of cockroach letter. We were very impressed with you. However, our interests don't match at this time, but we'd be happy to keep you in our active file. Goodbye and good luck.
Okay.
So now Saul Winstein comes into the lab, and he said, "Hi, Si, how's it going? How are you doing on the recruiting?" And I told him, well, I visited these 10 companies at that time and had eight invitations. I'm very impressed with Shell. And he says, what happened with Chevron? And I told him about what happened, and he was sort of embarrassed by that. Anyway, like 4 days later, I get a letter from Chevron. They've suddenly reevaluated my qualifications, and they're pleased to offer me this position in their exploratory chemicals department.
Wow.
And I haven't even visited them yet.
So Saul Winstein made a call.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
the recruiter probably.
Yeah, and Saul said, this recruiter was he's not a chemist. You're never going to see him again in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And Chevron should know better than to send a a human resources engineer to interview Ph.D. chemists. So I think Saul was annoyed and called Irv Levine, who was head of chemicals, and told Irv, you're making a mistake.
Yeah, those HR people are toxic.
Yeah. So in this letter I get from Chevron, the offer letter, I sort of played hardball. Thank you for your offer. It's, very interesting, but I don't see how I can possibly make a decision unless, I visit your facilities and talk to your people. And they call me, oh, of course, why don't you make arrangements to come up? And they told me where to go and all that. So I did that. And unlike Shell that put me up at the St. Francis Hotel, Chevron put me up at the Plaza Hotel on Union Square, which has since been torn down. Shell picked me up in a car and drove me around. Chevron said, walk over to the Standard Oil building and take a shuttle to the refinery. So I followed the directions. I met the people at Chevron. They weren't nearly as impressive as the Shell people. They didn't, wouldn't have known a free radical from anything else. So even after visiting Chevron and having their offer in my pocket, I still wasn't impressed. So I come back and there's Saul. And he said, how did it go? And I told him. And I said, they don't hold a candle to Shell. Shell's really doing good stuff, and they're much more organized. And Saul nods, and he says, okay, well, he asked the question you did. Why are you interested in either Chevron or Shell? And I said, because I really like the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, it turns out that Chevron's only research facility is in Richmond, California. But if you go with Shell, you may start out in Emeryville, but you could wind up in Torrance, California, or Wood River, Illinois, or Houston, Texas. So if location's important, you're more assured of it with Chevron. And then he said, and then I said, well, yeah, but Chevron's not doing any interesting chemistry. He said, you're absolutely right. Shell is tops in your field of free radical chemistry, and you'd fit in perfectly. But at Shell, you'd be a little fish in a big pond, and at Chevron, you'd be a big fish in a little pond. And I said, I'll think about it. And, a couple of days later, he said, have you thought about it? And I told him, yeah, I guess you're right. I'll go to work for Chevron.
So your thesis advisor and UCLA mentor.
He placed me essentially at Chevron. And the irony of it is that like a year or two after I got to Chevron in Richmond, Shell closed down in Emeryville and moved to Houston. So Saul was a prophet. He kind of knew, and based on my history at Chevron, and I knew people from Shell who were comparably as good as I was. I probably did better at Chevron than I would have done at Shell.
Interesting. So something drew you to the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Was it the culture and the
Yeah, it was
symphonies,
it
and
was the, it
museums?
was the culture, the symphonies, the museum, access to universities, and no one would even argue with that. San Francisco was the place where people wanted to go in California, not the Woodland Hills or Encino or Glendale or
Okay.
what is called La La Land today.
Right. So now you're in the Bay Area. You've got this pretty good job for the time,
Yeah.
$600 and something a month.
Yep.
Big money in those days. You're a young-ish single professional, and now you are looking to settle your life a little bit more. Everything has been academics
Yeah.
up to this point.
Yeah. So I just like when I got to UCLA, I played by the rules and kept true to my chemistry.
And didn't date the co-eds.
There weren't a lot of co-eds at Chevron either at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Chemistry wasn't. It was a man's field, particularly at Chevron, where Chevron was an oil company, and the culture was the oil field and the refinery. Chemicals were a sideline with them.
Mm-hmm.
So the culture, in order to be on the board of directors, you had to be over 6'2" tall and have blonde hair and play golf and stuff.
And
like
have a
that.
Texas drawl.
Yeah, and have a Texas. That would help.
So you're here in the Bay Area. You're young, and you're
Yeah, I
thinking of settling down.
I made some friends at Chevron. I knew people from Shell at Smutney, McClure, and I joined the local chemical society. I set up later on, a kind of chemistry seminar for chemists at Chevron to come to my house and drink beer and discuss chemistry. So that was good.
Okay.
One of my lab mates at Chevron was a guy named Bill Pryor, who left Chevron and took a job at Louisiana State. But before he left Chevron, he had been teaching at UC Berkeley Extension in one evening a week. And he invited me, hey, I got this position. You want to teach organic chemistry? And I said, yeah, that would be fun.
Okay.
So I spent, 2 or 3 years teaching, or 2 hours of organic chemistry every Wednesday night. In general, to adults, these were sort of non-creditable but non-credit courses.
Got it. Okay. So you're expanding your horizons in the Bay
into
Area.
Teaching, yeah.
You taught, you probably did some exploring, and now it's time to settle down a little bit.
Yeah, well, when I first arrived, I lived in Oakland in a studio apartment. Then I moved closer to Berkeley on Parker Street, near the university. And then I got a half of a duplex on Delaware Street. So, I was moving up and establishing myself.
Okay. And that establishing yourself probably also meant dating people, and kind of shifting to romantic relationships.
I
now.
had met some girls, nothing serious. I think there was 1 or 2 that I actually took home. And mercifully, nothing happened with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I was getting ready to settle down.
You wanted to start a
Yeah,
family.
yeah, and meanwhile, my career at Chevron, I think came in as a research assistant, and then I moved up after a couple of years to a research chemist, and then 2 or 3 years later, I became an assistant research associate. So I sort of had a pretty good career advancing up the scientific ladder at Chevron. Chevron in those days had sort of three paths within the company. The blue line, which would have been completely technical, chemistry or engineering or whatever. The red line, which was management, and then the brown line, which was administration, including human resources.
How appropriate.
And the blue line was the bluest, was the best.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually stayed on the blue line throughout my career. After about 20 years, I was appointed to senior research scientist, which was the absolute top of the blue line. So I had achieved that. And then when an opening came up, when my friend Clippinger left and went to ortho, they shifted me over as manager of pioneering chemicals research. So for about the last 8 years of my career, I was both a research scientist, the top of the blue line, and a manager of pioneering research. And that was pretty good.
Okay. So we've talked about your career at Chevron. We'll talk a little bit more about other parts of your career.
Okay.
But something else happened
Right.
after you joined Chevron and before you left Chevron.
Yeah.
And that was meeting Anne Frankel,
My romantic life.
your romantic life.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested, as the product of you and Anne,
Okay.
to understand how you met.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because the year is 1963. There was no internet. There was no J-date. People met by going to clubs or bars or parties or events. And I joined a group called the San Francisco Young Democrats because these were young people, largely Jewish. They were Democrats, liberals, much like myself. And they actually, during an election year, they would pass out pamphlets and try to get out the vote. At one time, I was actually a kind of Democratic precinct captain on Delaware Street in Berkeley. But when there wasn't an election, they wanted to keep this group together, so they would have cocktail parties at some bar, usually in the financial district of San Francisco, like the third Friday of every month, starting at 5:30. Paoli's, another one, this one, that one. And, men would go there hoping to get lucky,
Meet women.
meet women. Women would go there hoping to meet their Prince Charming, but absent that, they'd be happy to get asked out for dinner or something. And I had been going to these events, usually with Jim McClure, a friend. And I had, met some women then. But in August of 1963, I went to one, and it turns out I had had a rough week, and traffic was heavy, so I didn't get to the bar until like 6:15, 6:30. This is an event that starts at 5:30. So all the hot women were picked up early in the thing, and when I got there at 6:30, people had already clustered and congregated. And, I didn't mix in or anything. And after a while, I just took my drink and sat down in a corner and lit up my pipe and watched the world go by.
You were observing, minding your own
Yeah,
business.
and my friend McClure was still hustling.
Mm-hmm.
And, the plan was that if nothing ever had happened, he and I would go out for dinner somewhere.
Okay. So there you are,
So
sitting in the corner with your pipe,
So, yeah,
And-
drinking.
drinking.
Now let me introduce Anne. A week earlier, her girlfriend Shirley had called her and said, "What are you doing this over the weekend?" "Not much. You want to go out for dinner and a movie on Friday night?" Sure. They even decided what movie they were going to go to. And then Shirley said, "There's a Tipler event. Why don't we stop in there and then go to the movie or something?" And Ann said, "Sure." So now we're both at this bar in the financial district.
Somewhat begrudgingly, it sounded like. You got there late.
I got there late, and I didn't want to, didn't score. And at that point didn't even try to score. And Anne probably didn't score either. And so here I was in the corner sipping a drink and smoking my pipe, and she comes up to me and she says, "You look very relaxed."
So she came up to you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. She came up to me,
Okay.
and I'm not even sure I had noticed her in the crowd before that. Or if I had, so she came up to me and she was ready, she was waiting for her girlfriend Shirley to finish up what she was doing, and then they were going to go out to dinner and a movie.
Okay.
So now Anne's talking to me, and we have the usual cocktail chatter. Where are you from? Do you live around here? Yes. Where? The Marina. She asked me where I am. I'm in Berkeley. What do you do? I said, I'm a research chemist for Chevron. Very nice. And then I asked her, what do you do? And she says, guess. And I said, that wasn't the expected answer. So I said,
But it was playful.
Yeah, it was playful. Yeah. So I said, well, we're in the financial district. You work for a brokerage firm. Nope. You're an attorney or a paralegal. Nope. You're a school teacher. Nope. I said, okay, I give up. So now get this. She says, have you ever been to Bimbo's 365 Club? And actually I hadn't, but Bimbo's 365 Club was a legend because it had the girl in the Goldfish bowl. The back bar of the 365 Club was a big fish tank full of live fish, and this tank had a transparent glass bottom, and in the basement on the floor below there was a woman in a flesh-colored leotard swimming.
Okay.
And through mirrors and reflection, it gave the illusion of this naked woman swimming in the fish tank. And people, from all over the world, it was a very popular tourist place to come see the girl in the Goldfish bowl. So she said, have you ever been to Bimbo's 365 Club? I said, yeah. She said, have you seen the girl in the Goldfish bowl? I said, oh, of course. And she said, that's me. She had never been there either. And I haven't been there to this day.
So she picked you up.
So she absolutely picked me up. That was her opening line. And then we chatted some more, and by now it's 7:25 or 7:20, and the party's getting over. So I said, are you doing anything for dinner tonight? And she said, well, let me check with my girlfriend. And I suppose at that time, if she wanted to, she could have just walked out the door and I would have never seen her again. But she did check with a girlfriend, and she came back and she said, let's go.
Wow.
So it turns out so now I have to take her somewhere. And there was a favorite restaurant called Chez Marguerite. And this would have been the consummate French bistro. Dark candlelight,
Romantic.
red and white checkered tablecloths, peasant, everyday person food, not high French cuisine, but ordinary, a real French, like a neighborhood bistro.
So what's going through your mind? Here's this woman who obviously you have an attraction to and who has an attraction to you. You invite her out to dinner. She says yes. Now you're at this romantic French bistro, Chez Marguerite.
No, well, it was really, when I think about it now, it was really romantic, So here were this.
You sly dog.
This was a very romantic French bistro. I guess we were both trying to impress each other, so we sit down, look at the menus. The waiter comes. I ask Anne, "You want to share some escargot?" And she said, "But of course, what else?" So we started with escargot, and then I think I ordered coq au vin or something, and a salad, and she ordered rabbit stew.
Rabbit stew.
Rabbit stew, and that was the first and probably last time she had ever eaten rabbit.
So you think she was doing that too?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
You don't think she just had a hankering for rabbit that day?
No.
Okay. So there you are trying to impress each other.
And this place had, a Vin Rouge ordinaire. We had a carafe of that, and candlelight and wine, and we talked and talked and talked, and we actually, sort of closed the place up. I think they threw us out at about 10:30 or something because they were closing.
So you hit it off on day number one.
You betcha.
After meeting her.
You betcha.
Wow. Okay, so now
then, I took her back to her car, and we exchanged contact information.
Was there a kiss?
Kind of the perfunctory peck on the cheek.
A peck on the cheek.
But, I waited till the following Wednesday. I didn't want her
You didn't call the next day.
I didn't call the next day and tell her I couldn't sleep all night thinking of you.
Wow. Well, but well, okay. So
I
I know
called
what
her.
you did.
Yeah.
What were you feeling?
Uh,
Did you want to
This
call
was,
the next
oh
day?
yeah, this was a woman that I would have liked to have pursued. And then, I think in the course of our conversation, we talked about, where'd you grow up and all that. And she says, Singapore,
Very exotic.
and that's a real conversation piece.
Sure.
And, why were you born in Singapore? Because my parents were born in Singapore. And she didn't look Malay at all.
So wait a sec. Let me get this straight, just so I'm clear. You go out for this incredibly romantic dinner.
Yeah.
You shut the place down.
Oh, I forgot to tell you, during dinner at Chez Marguerite, they had recordings of Edith Piaf. Do you know Edith Piaf singing?
I don't know Edith Piaf singing.
It tears your heart out. Love songs. La Vie en Rose.
So this is a very romantic dinner.
Oh,
And then I want to be very clear about
Yeah.
this, Dad. You made the conscious choice not to call her the next day or
Yeah.
the following
yeah,
day.
I think I called on Wednesday.
So 3 days after this
Yeah, yeah.
romantic
Sure.
dinner. Okay.
And she was obviously very happy to see me. And
Hear from you. You called her.
So, yeah. So,
Okay.
and we arranged to meet, and, I knew her address and got there, and we went out, and the rest is history.
Well, we made a big leap from this Edith Piaf inspired romantic dinner to the rest being history. So how long did you date?
We dated, well, let's see, we got married November 15th, 1964. We met August of 1963. So over a year of dating, but then there was a period of time, and that's part of the Anne story. So we were dating, and I would see her, every weekend, and we'd go for walks and picnics and Greek theater and plays.
And wasn't there a couple of trips up to Napa too?
A little later, probably not in 63, but probably in spring of 64.
Okay. But before you were engaged.
Yeah.
Okay. So you
So I think we really connected. It turns out I had been working for Chevron for 7 years and was entitled to 3 weeks vacation. And I had used up 1 week in the spring of 63. Maybe I went home for Pesach or went down to LA or something. So I had burned 1 week and I had 2 weeks left, and Chevron had this policy. You had to start your vacation in the year that it was accumulated. So I didn't have any plans for the other 2 weeks, but I found an ad in the newspaper for pleasant Hawaiian holidays. So it was it wasn't a tour, but a prepaid package where they got you on a plane, picked you up at the airport, got you to your hotel, gave you a Gray Line bus tour, then you're on your own. At the end, they pick you up and take you back to the airport. So I had made these reservations. This reservation, I had never been to Hawaii before I met Anne. So now it's December, and I guess I went to Hawaii by myself, and the tour worked out fine, but I was alone, and most of the time I was hanging out at the beach. And this was the height of the tourist season, Christmas week. I think my reservation was from like December 23rd to January 3rd. And hanging out on the beach, I would see all these girls, but none of them compared to Anne. I kept thinking of Anne. And by the 28th of December, I said, I got to get out of here. I want to be with her. And in those days, hotels, all the airlines had offices in the lobbies of hotels. So I went from airline to airline, get me back to San Francisco as soon as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And I was finally able to get a flight leaving Honolulu at like 11 o'clock at night on New Year's Eve. I remember it was New Year's Eve because an hour into the flight, they broke out champagne and played Auld Lang Syne. And I got back home to Berkeley at some ungodly hour because of the flight difference and time difference. And at a reasonable hour in the late morning or afternoon, I called Anne and
said, I'm back.
And she was very, very surprised and obviously happy to hear from me. And I asked her what she was, what are you doing for dinner tonight? Come on over. And I would say that's when we truly connected.
Wow. So you cut short your Hawaiian vacation,
Yep.
Your first trip to Hawaii
Yep.
ever, and flew back to California so that you could spend
Yep.
time with Anne.
Yep.
Okay. So things are getting serious.
Yeah. And just when things are getting serious, Anne's Auntie Anna dies and leaves $10,000 to each of her nieces and nephews, including Anne. So now Anne is footloose and fancy free. She gives up her job, she gives up her apartment, and she takes off for Europe for as long as her money would hold out.
Wait a second. So she got this windfall and
Yep.
she quit her job,
Yep.
got rid of her apartment,
Yep.
bought a one-way ticket to Europe?
Well, ultimately she had planned on coming back, but she didn't have a comeback date. She was going to go as far as her money would take her.
So the two of you were dating heavily.
Yeah.
You had flown back from Hawaii,
And
and
then
she
she
says, I
takes
got
off.
this windfall. I'll see you later. I got rid of my apartment.
Well, she didn't quite say see you later because now she's in Paris and London and Amsterdam, and I think she even went to Morocco. I would get 2 letters a day from her. So I think she spent most of her time writing letters to me, and she'd tell me what you do, and I wish you were here, come and we'll do this together and do that. And she was pleading with me.
What happened to those letters?
I've got them.
You have those letters?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want me to get them?
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
We'll get those letters.
Yeah.
Wow. That is remarkable.
Quand il me prend dans ses bras, qu'il me parle tout bas, je vois la vie en rose. Il quelque chose.